Alright, so here's a little quick display and demo of what I have built here for kind of what I would refer to as my 12 volt life. Cut the power adapter for an Xbox, which I can kind of explain that a little more in a minute, and kind of figured it out and built this adapter to run it off of 12 volts. Car battery kind of thing. In this case, I'll use a jump pack for demo. So we'll just go ahead and plug that into the Gen 3 box. I unscrewed the cover so you can kind of see what I've got going on in here. I've got all the power coming in. It's going through a 15 amp fuse, going through the switch just so I can cut it off. And then the output from the switch is going 12 volts via the yellow wires directly to the Xbox. And then 12 volts into a DC to DC converter. It's a 12 volt to 5 volt buck. Got it off of Amazon for about $7. My earlier experiments with the 5 volt signal, I was also able to use a USB charger adapter, cut it off, and find the polarity. In this case, you're 5 volts positive for red and 5 volts negative for yellow. So I've got a fully charged jump pack here sitting at 1294. Let's see if I get a good connection here, because of course these cigarette lighters are sometimes kind of crappy. There we go. So power's on there. Hasn't really dropped. It's pretty much residual. Turn it off. Yeah, 0.01. Back on. 0.01 drop. So there isn't much concern about leaving it on, obviously, as it's barely pulling much at all, but just a tiny bit. But with that being the case, and just like that. Now that the Xbox is running and booting, and has gone from 12.94 to 12.4547. Seems to be about the going number. So here it usually drops. It usually pulls about roughly 2 amps or so. Previous experiment I did, it was at 12.4. I turned it on, it hit 12.2. And stayed at about 12.2, and after about half an hour of play, and this was on a lawn and garden battery, it had dropped to 12.08, and it is an older battery too, so I'm sure the obviously the size of the battery and the age of the battery will affect it. But yeah, this was fairly straightforward, just soldered, crammed in there, a little bit of a 2-part adhesive to keep everything in touch. Little Velcro on the bottom, because then I'll mount it in the camper next to the actual Xbox itself. A little bit about the adapter here. The Xbox power supply works a lot like your standard computer power supply. Computers run on 12 volts and 5 volts. 5 volt general reference. Kind of works the same way. When you plug the power supply in and you get the little orange light on up front here, the power supply is sending a 5 volt reference via the, let's see, get it backwards here, the red is your 5 volt reference, and then the gray is your 5 volt ground. So it sends that up to the box, and when you hit the power button on the Xbox, a 5 volt signal is sent back via this red wire to turn the power supply on and begin kicking out the 12 volts, which is positive through the yellows and the 12 volt ground through the black. And as you can see, I'll go ahead and shut that off. Works perfectly well like normal. And you can see the yellows and the blacks. Get the camera in the right spot like an idiot. They're just going to the same pin on the board, and everything's pretty well labeled. 12 volts positive, 12 volts negative. You can see the power enter 1 for the blue, ground 5 volts for gray, and then positive 5 volts is that red wire. And that was all that was in there. And so far as I can gather, it's pretty much the same on the earlier generations of the Xbox too. The only difference being the Gen 3 Xbox has everything going through one connector, and to the untrained eye, one would think it's a lot like a laptop with just 2 conductors, but there's actually 5 conductors going on here. So it's definitely quite the impressive little jack, that's for sure. I'd been wanting to do this sometime since back when the Gen 2 Xbox came out, and it had what basically was 2 barrel plugs in the back, and I had noted, looking at the information on the supply, that it was the 12 volts and 5 volts. And I was like, I bet I could make this run directly on a battery, which would save juice when using it in the camper. As you can see, it's 12 volts, 9.6 amps, which is a fairly good amount of power, and the 5 volts is only 1 amp, so you know the 5 volts is really not doing much. In fact, in my early tests, once the box was booted up and running, you could cut the 5 volts out of the equation, and the box would stay running just fine, and would shut down like normal. It just wouldn't start back up without a 5 volt reference. Battery's back at 12.85. So yeah, that's my 12 volt conversion for the Xbox, which will go well with the 12 volt LED TV that is already in the camper, and the idea of running more efficiently off of a battery. Because a lot of people just think, oh, plug a power inverter in, but people tend to not realize power inverters, they have to step up the power, and they tend to generate heat and suck in a lot of power to make that happen. So they are relatively criminally inefficient. Some are better than others, but I mean, you're talking about spending a lot of money on a modified sine wave power inverter to get anything decent. But at this point now, if you can do creative things like this, then it's not really it's a non-issue essentially. The next step will be modifying the speakers and the TVs, so that way I don't have to bother running some sort of soundbar or something to take up the extra power. So hopefully this was helpful to some people that I know have been experimenting with these similar ideas. At this point too, this power supply I could even use for other projects, as it does develop a nice, strong, just shy of 10 amp, 12 volt source that could be used to power car stereos and other goofy things. Pretty much all you have to do is just jump the 5 volts and 5 volts reference together, and that'll kick the power supply on pretty much constantly. So yeah, that's how I made that work.